Welcome, everyone, to Reading Inspires podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Shannon Kane, who is a good friend and former colleague of mine at the Inspired Teaching Demonstration School in Washington, D.C. And today, we're going to be talking about AI and literacy. So, welcome, Shannon. If you can start by sharing about your story, how did you get into education and literacy and AI? Because I've known you for a while, but AI is new to all of us. So, I'd love to hear how you got into it.
Sure. Thanks, Erin. I'm really excited to be here. So, I got into education, I would say, in a sort of a unique path. When I graduated college, I thought I was going to work in international development and public health. I went and pursued a master's degree, a joint degree in that field, and I started to work sort of internationally in education. As we know, things can change quickly, both internationally and domestically. And so I was sort of redirected to continue my interest in education, sort of a different path, and an opportunity opened up here in DC that I was able to take advantage of and sort of turned my focus to K-12 education here in the States, became a teacher and worked as a classroom teacher, bilingual teacher for about 5 years before I went and pursued my doctorate in literacy at University of Pennsylvania. And knowing that I still always wanted to work with teachers and kids, I did a couple of different things. That's where our paths connected when I was doing some work at the Inspired Teaching School and eventually found myself in higher ed in my current role as a assistant clinical professor at the University of Maryland. So that's sort of how I came to education. And in terms of AI, honestly, a colleague of mine and I were sitting around just sort of thinking about AI and hearing teachers talk about it. And I feel like you can't get online without seeing ads for AI and teachers. And we were just talking about how we use it ourselves, and we're wondering, how can we use it as professionals to support our roles as teacher educators, but then also what is our responsibility? Can we ethically and critically support our teachers, pre-service teachers, and even our in-service teachers, sort of exploration and use of AI, not only as professionals, but then as they look to support their own students' use of AI. And so we started a self-study, and it sort of has grown from there, collecting data, doing a lot of research on it, doing PD on it, and it's just sort of continues to grow as AI does.
That makes a lot of sense because you work with pre-service teachers. Everything is new in education to them, right?
Ab- Absolutely. Yeah.
But in
And
service
honestly, even
teachers,
in service teachers as well, I think AI is very new to them. And
yeah,
so, yeah.
it's new to everyone. Do you feel like pre-service teachers are, because they're more digital natives, are they more comfortable using AI?
Actually, it's the opposite, which we find completely fascinating. So we've done a bunch of in-service. So our most recent in-service, we worked with about 85 teachers this past August around AI, and everyone in the room uses it to varying degrees. Their understanding of it, their comfort with it, obviously varied tremendously. There's been no formal training on it. They just sort of, it's kind of like the Wild Wild West, right? Figuring it out themselves. But they're all in on it. They love the efficiency of it. They want to know more about it. Whereas our pre-service teachers, I think because of the age that they are, a lot of them have been hearing there's this sort of like taboo around AI, right? And so they've been hearing, it's cheating, it's bad, it's this, if you're caught using it. And so they tend to be a little bit more sort of cautious about it. When in, one of my courses, we talk like, nope, we're going to use it intentionally. And they're like, wait, like you're letting us use it? And I'm like, well, I'm not just letting you use it. Like, we're going to learn about it together. We're going to critically, evaluate the responses. When should we use it? When is it not helpful? And so, but yeah, I assumed the same thing, that our pre-service teachers would be all about it. And they actually are a little bit more cautious, which I appreciate. But it's definitely coming from, I think they're just constantly have been bombarded since they were in high school and stuff, that it's cheating, it's bad, you're going to be caught. So yeah, it's
I was
interesting.
I was just thinking that too, as you were saying that, because they're pre-service teachers and many of them are undergrad students, they've really just come from high school where it's been drilled into them
Yep.
perhaps that it's cheating and it's wrong.
Yep.
So then going into a new landscape of college and teacher training, and now they're being challenged to use it. So I can see
Hmm.
why they would be cautious with it. I'm wondering from the teachers that you worked with, the 85, you said 85 in-service teachers, what were some of
Yep.
the common ways that they were using AI?
They were using it from simple things like helping with emails, and responding to everyone's favorite report card comments, to some, I would say the more advanced users were using it for some differentiation, right? So supporting multilingual learners, maybe differentiating some texts, some tasks, um, trying to maybe infuse a little bit of creativity here and there. But to be honest, a lot of it was really surface level. I think because there has not been a lot of formal training. So our goal for the session was really to give them some a little bit of background understanding so they could walk away with knowing about the tools that they were using and to see them really as tools, and that they still were in charge and the professionals. And then also just some, transferable things that a little bit beyond that surface level. We sort of showed them how they could create very simple games that students could play online, like have the AI do the coding for them, to instant translators, to different fluency, things. And we were really working with groups across elementary and secondary. And so I would say that most of the teachers were using it for, again, that surface level, which is a great start. But I think without a lot of intentional training and support, I think that's what you really would expect from folks. And they're just starting to sort of see the potential in, scaffolding, differentiation, student choice, etc.
I think I'm there with them. For me currently as a AI user, I'm at the surface level, haven't gotten that deep, and mostly I'm doing things right now that I think would be time savers for me
Yep.
or take away tasks and allow me to focus more on other tasks.
100%, which is a great use of it, right? Because and we lay that out with our pre-service teachers as well as the in-service teachers, in that, there is so much work. There's like you could work nonstop as an educator and still have more to do, right? And so if you can lean on AI to help to be efficient, to knock out some of the lower level tasks and create space for you to focus on the tasks that require the knowledge about students, or the differentiation, or the harder or heavier lifts, right? That's great. So you save time and you are able to focus on the sort of longer lever, or the tasks that are really going to push student learning further.
So here's an experience that I've had recently working with foundational skills. As a teacher, when I taught phonemic awareness and phonics, I paid attention to the mouth shape,
Right.
um, pronouncing the sound and the mouth shape. I'm working
Hmm.
with a colleague on training AI and video AI to be able to do this because currently you can, have an AI avatar, but it doesn't seem that the technology is sophisticated enough to match the mouth shape
Hmm.
to the sounds and even training it in the sounds. And we all have different dialects. So if
Right.
I'm the teacher, the phonemes would need to be in my dialect. So I'm wondering if you've seen anything or had any experience in AI supporting those foundational reading skills.
So I think, I mean, it can definitely, for early readers and those foundational skills, I think AI is continuing to evolve, right? I think that, as you mentioned, with growing sort of advancements with video recognition and even sort of dialect, and there's also been AI work done with, especially with multilingual learners, sort of supporting with like accents and things like that. So, I mean, that is again continuing to evolve, but I think in general, the fact that there are speech recognition tools now, that can support, which again doesn't have the visual sort of cues, which is important. But if we know it's a matter of just practicing the sounds, and the student has that sort of, let's say the teacher's done sort of the initial assessment and knows that the student is making the sounds with proper mouth placement and such, and they just need practice, right? You have the speech recognition tools where students are reading aloud, and there is that immediate feedback around pronunciation, around fluency. There's a lot of games and interactions, right? Where, and again, this is something that is, it's once you learn how to do it in terms of having the AI do the coding. And what's nice about it is it produces games that are in a closed system. So you don't need the internet. It's not a at cost thing, which again goes to equity as well. You know, students can do a lot of the matching of the sounds, can repeat sounds, can do a lot of the phoneme segmentation and replacement and deletion, right? And so, and again, it's at their pace, but it's also interactive and game-like. And so while these are not necessarily anywhere near replacements for that initial instruction, and they're not sort of universal solutions for all, it's definitely another avenue that allows students to sort of do some independent practice in this low pressure environment. And we all know that repetition is key with these foundational skills. And so it's just another way to get that repetition in a way that hopefully students won't be bored, they're engaged, and allows them to build those early literacy skills.
I was thinking that too. A repetition that's fun and engaging, because if it's just
Right,
repetition, then it feels like a burden, a task, and
right.
students aren't going to be interested in that. But the way you're describing it, if the teacher does the initial instruction and the student just needs more practice and repetition, it's actually a engaging way. And I feel like if I were the teacher in this scenario, I might even say something to the student like, you're helping train this system. And by you
Absolutely.
interacting with this system, you're becoming the teacher to this AI tool.
Right. And the other thing too is when we think about sort of like small group work or that repetition work, right? There's that fine line between work that's reinforcing skills and helping students move towards mastery and sort of busy work. And we know the importance of being able to work with students in small groups or one-on-one, and then what is everyone else doing? But one of the things that AI has really created an opportunity for is it really allows for you to create these very targeted, intended differentiated sort of opportunities of repetition and practice in game form for students that literally takes like seconds, if not minutes, right? Like, so, and allows you now to create these very targeted opportunities, game format for students. And if we think about the amount of time that would have taken to do by hand or cutting or pasting, right? Like now all of a sudden, like it's great in theory, but I just don't have the time or space to do it. But AI has really opened that space. So it's like I've taught my whole class these skills. And so now I know this group needs to practice this and this group needs to practice this. And I'm going to work with this group, and everyone's getting what they need. In this, again, you know, low stakes, having fun, interactive opportunity to sort of reinforce through repetition and practice.
That's great. Well, I know you're an expert in writing instruction too, so I wanted to make sure I asked you how AI can help students at the beginning phases of writing, like generating ideas, planning and organizing their writing, and helping them think through the writing process.
Great. So, I mean, I think this is a great question because I think this is probably one of the areas where, you know, people assume plagiarism or, you know, that AI is doing the work. But I think it's great because balance is really everything. So, the best use of AI would really be sort of a nudge for students and not a crutch, right? So, just similar to as teaching, right? We want to teach students writing, we don't fix their writing. And so, you know, with AI, it can offer anything from visual prompts to graphic organizers to sentence starters, right? So all of that brainstorming, right? So one of the challenges is, and one of the reasons why students often get frustrated the most is, you know, they're staring at that blank page, right? Like they don't have an idea. They don't know where to begin. They're overwhelmed, right? It's like that paralysis by analysis. And so when they sit with you, they're able to brainstorm and bounce ideas off. And depending on the age of the student, sometimes older students can do it with a partner, but we know younger students, you know, that partner work can be hard, right? Developmentally, that it's not necessarily doesn't come natural to them and it's not in their wheelhouse. But AI can be that partner, right? Like you can't always sit next to every student that needs help brainstorming and help them, but AI can be that tool, right? It can create from structured planning templates to like, having it have the student work through who the audience is or what happens next, right? So it's that metacognitive planning and idea generation, but it's actually not doing the content generation, right? So, in some ways it's truly that scaffolding that we envision, right? Outside of a building and it's supporting the building as it's being built. Well, here we can use AI to really create that scaffolding for our students writing. The student's still generating the content, but the AI is helping them to create that content versus creating it for the student.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example. So a really popular um, writing prompt, at least when I was teaching for third graders, was to rewrite a fairy tale, right? And you could
Right.
change the setting, the characters, the prompt. So if I'm a student and I'm bouncing off ideas with my AI language agent, and I say, I really like aliens, and AI says, how about Goldilocks and the three aliens? Or, I'm making up a scenario, but from your
Right.
experience, do students still feel like they have agency, and do they feel ownership of that when they are generating ideas together with AI?
I think they can, right? I think it's also the what's next in the process, right? I think having then the students reflect on their use of the tool, right? Like what did they find helpful? What didn't they find helpful? Because there's going to be other things that the AI may suggest that you're like, I mean, anyone who's maybe used AI for email or like giving feedback, or, people sometimes forget that even if you use Grammarly, Grammarly is now all AI use, right? So
Hmm.
when it's making suggestions for your writing, sometimes you're like, oh, that's a great suggestion. But other times you're like, no, who would write like that? Or that doesn't sound like me at all, right? And so we need to teach our students to do that as well, right? That not every suggestion or nudge by the AI is good. And so, but having students sort of decide, well, why didn't you like it? Well, I didn't like it because it wasn't really what I meant, or I didn't like it because it didn't sound like me, or I
Hmm.
didn't like it because it was silly or lame or whatever, stupid, whatever a elementary student would say, to that response. And so I think it's getting them to reflect on the tool is really then what ensures that they have that agency, right? And that they have that voice because they're in control. You don't have to take every suggestion. I mean, and I think as teachers modeling that, right? Um, when I give feedback to students, or when I've received feedback, I don't have to take every piece, but it's that sort of why am I intentionally choosing not to incorporate that piece of feedback, or why I am intentionally choosing to incorporate it. It's that I think that really gives us our voice and agency, right? Like when I have that choice to make that decision, our students still have that choice. We just have to emphasize and underscore that with them. And the same happens when you, the teacher, give written feedback, right? There are some things that, yes, spelling, maybe if it's a word that they should absolutely know, we may be like, check that on the word wall, and you expect them to spell it correctly. Or, if it's a skill around punctuation that they know, yes, you expect it. But other than that, you may just give more open-ended suggestions. And so, just like with teacher feedback, you don't have to take all pieces of feedback from AI, but it's the why you are taking it or why you're not taking it that I think is an important step that we can't skip to ensure that students do have that agency and voice.
Yeah, I can even imagine this as, you thinking of your traditional writing unit, and one interactive writing lesson could be you modeling how you're interacting with AI in your own writing, and doing a think aloud of,
Hmm.
I'm not going to use this because it doesn't sound like me. I liked the way
Hmm.
I wrote it before, or
Right.
yes, that sounds a lot better. It helped me think about this. So I think that's really important to model that for students so that
Hmm.
they can start to do it on their own.
Absolutely. And then again, it becomes a tool and it's not just a replacement, right? And understanding that. And we do that all the time as adults, and we need to do that modeling and that metacognition, whether we're writing with a traditional pen, whether we're writing on a, computer, whether we're using AI. And so it's just really important. We can't skip that step. If anything, I'd argue it's more important with a tool like AI, because again, we want it to be a tool, we want it to be a nudge. It's not a replacement. It's not a crutch. It's not a shortcut. And showing students that when you use it as those things, it's really problematic because it doesn't produce accurate stuff all the time. It's not always the best written work. Sometimes you read it and you're like, that's really awkward. Like no one would write or talk like that, And so students need to see that and understand that.
And it's a way to introduce plagiarism too. It can
Hmm.
actually be a non-example and lead to a lesson. I'm thinking of this was before AI, but I had a student teacher once who was writing with a student, and he was writing a book about pandas, and the title of the chapter was "Growing Up Small" or "Starting Out Small." And she said, "Oh, starting out small, that's a great title for your chapter on panda babies." And he said, "Yeah, it's such a great title that this author did it in this book." So he had clearly plagiarized, and she kind of looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, like what do I do now?" She's a student teacher, so this is her first time in the classroom. And I said, "No, actually, this is a great way to
Yep.
introduce plagiarism to that student." And I can see that too with how to
Hmm.
introduce plagiarism with AI.
Absolutely. And then also thinking about it is we think about mentor text, right? Like sometimes we use mentor texts as examples, right? And sometimes we use them as non-examples. And the same can be true with AI as a mentor text.
Yeah, that's great. I want to return to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned equity. I'm sure many teachers, we're all working at different schools, different families, children coming from different backgrounds. So, what are some of the equity considerations that schools and teachers should keep in mind when they're introducing AI literacy tools?
Well, I think equity is obviously crucial. I mean, in all things, but especially here because if it's meant to be a tool to sort of create access points and supports, we want to ensure that all students have those access points and supports, right? And so I think the first thing is, or a key thing is that schools ensuring that AI is accessible on multiple devices, right? Whether they, that includes working offline or low bandwidth or and the availability of in different languages. We had a student panel recently. It was last spring, and it was fascinating because it was students from local high schools in different counties. And one of the students says, the county that my school is in is very affluent. My school is very affluent. But the decision at the time was to ban an AI. And he was like, well, that's all fine and good, but only on school computers. He's like, but
Mhm.
all of us that have our own computers, we can get it whenever we want. So he's like, so for myself and my peers, okay, you can ban AI use on school devices, but we can also access our school accounts from our personal devices, which have no bans. But he's like, any students that are reliant on the school devices are now already in an unequal footing from us. And this was from a student in high school. So they're very aware of these things. And so again, if the policy is just to ban it outright because as adults we don't know how to figure out how to teach it critically and reflectively and ethically, well we're creating an inequity an inequitable situation by that. So I think again it's if you're going to have it accessible, it should be on all devices. It should be on, offline, low bandwidths, etc. And realize if you're banning it, you are creating an equity situation. I think the big thing is teacher training, right? And so again, because if a group of students happens to be in a class with someone who's very comfortable and familiar with it, their experience is going to be very different than someone who may have no idea how to use it and avoids it, right? And again, it's not just about having access to the tools. We want the tools to be used critically. We want to reflect on the tools, etc. Just not tossed in the classroom. And again, like the wild, wild west of the internet, right? And another thing is in parents, right? That I think that contributes to the equity question as well. Making sure families understand it, right? And support how it can support learning, sort of demystifying it. Because like many of our pre-service teachers, I'm sure that a lot of the messages that parents are hearing, maybe on it's bad, it's cheating, etc. And so I really think that if we want equity to truly be considered, it's about access, it's about understanding the use of the tool and agency, right? That all has to be present if we're really going to ensure that, AI is not for some, is not just available for some.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Coming from a student, as you were talking, I was thinking we've also somewhat navigated this road before, right? I When I first
Hmm.
started teaching, it was around the time when smartphones came out and
Yep.
there were the first iPads, and everyone was kind of confused about what to do then. Like, oh, should we
Hmm.
ban smartphones and iPads in the classrooms, or and then some of the more
Yep.
progressive schools was everyone had one-to-one
Hmm.
tablets. So we have navigated these similar waters before, and we can learn
Yep.
from that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's huge, right? And the same thing, even like the internet, right? Like when the internet was first
Mhm.
coming, coming around. I think it's sort of like hopefully we're learning from what we did well. And then, and even just thinking about, when COVID came about, how we as schools had to pivot, right? And go to sort of online learning, right? There were aspects of it that we did really well, and there were aspects that were not done well, and or like highlighted some areas that we needed to fix. And so hopefully we're learning from those, past sort of either technological integrations and advancements and then, global pandemics. And so hopefully we can take from that. And again, listen, because I thought it was incredibly powerful to have these high school students point that out. Like, hey, my school district decided to ban it, which is all fine and good, but everyone that has their own device has access to it.
Mhm.
And we can use our own devices to access school stuff. So really, you're only banning it from a group of students based on socioeconomic status. And to hear that come from the mouth of high school students, I'm like, anyone else could have said that. And I don't think it's anywhere near as powerful. So like, let's listen to the kids in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about different learners, different backgrounds, what have you found is the best way for AI to reach a wide range of learners? I know you have extensive work with multilingual students too.
Mhm. I mean, I think that's one of the cool things about AI, right, is this adaptive learning. And I think, the early iterations of it were those like assessments, right? The online assessments and adaptive learning. But I think the fact that it can be used in teaching and not just assessments is really helpful and powerful. I think, for multilingual learners, like just the translation, like real-time translation from oral language, for and as thinking about like the growth of multilingual learners. Like, so
Mhm.
I work in the state of Maryland, and obviously there are some counties within the state that have a larger population of multilingual learners, and so therefore have more supports. But at this point, there's no county in the state that doesn't have at least one multilingual learner. And as we can think about, counties where the population is much lower but growing, like resources are catching up. And so to be able to use AI for translation real time instantly, visual supports, bilingual dictionaries, right? Just for it to be able to effectively allow for differentiation, the fact that you can put into AI a prompt involving WIDA levels and literally have it generate work for students. And again, these are things that teachers are ultimately tasked with doing, but take time. And again, if you're a teacher who's just starting to get multilingual learners in your class, or maybe have not had, a student from this level before, like these are things that again can be amazing resources. But I also think of other learning differences with students, from text to speech, speech to text, pacing, just this responsiveness, not only to the learner's needs, but also to instruction. It really does create so many multiple entry points to content in different ways, which again is like the true essence of differentiation, right? Like if differentiation we're thinking about across content, process, product, classroom environment, and assessment, right? AI can really help with most of those things. Maybe not the classroom environment a little potentially, like if we think of listening. But yeah, so the fact that it can support teachers and students across all of those categories, I think is huge.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also how great the translation services are for families and getting
Mhm.
messages home to families. And it might not be perfect.
Absolutely.
It might not be perfect, but it's better than you as the teacher trying to mime something to a family, right? It's going to get you at least
Right.
halfway there.
Or relying on students to do
Yeah,
translations, which I
yes.
think can be unfair and awkward, right? And so,
Mhm.
and they are getting better. Like the accuracy of not only are like the mistakes and hallucinations in stuff like ChatGPT or a Gemini drastically lower in these new versions that have just come out, but the translations are getting incredibly accurate. And so, like you said, it may not be 100% perfect, but it's definitely getting the idea across. It's absolutely better than not translating and respecting home languages. And it's certainly better than relying on a small student to do the translating between two adults.
I've done it before. Guilty of
Yep. Oh, I
guilty of
have too.
it.
Absolutely, right? Like you can't get someone on the language line. And it's a language you happen not to speak, and like you have to in the moment. And so it's like you said, miming, small child, like you're using anything possible. But now that you have this another tool, and the fact that most of these are also now on your phone, so it's not even like you have
Hmm.
to awkwardly carry your laptop around. It's a game changer, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This has been wonderful, Shannon. I'm wondering if you think about, I was gonna say in the next 5 years, but honestly, AI is evolving so rapidly. I'll say in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, what emerging AI capabilities do you think or hope will have the biggest impact on K through 8 students to learn to read and write?
That's a great question. I think one thing that you already mentioned is just the visual. So training AI to be able to recognize, mouth placement and sort of how you make the phonemes and stuff. I think that goes along with this idea of like multimodal AI. And so again, the text, the speech, the visuals, right? Like so it's almost like a holistic learning environment. The fact that that's changing at such a huge pace, I think is so exciting, right? Because at like when that multimodal environment is sort of complete, like think about it. So you could have this AI system, it could listen to a student read. At the same time, it could pop up sort of vocabulary visuals, right? And then students can write and illustrate based on their own drawings, like right almost instantly, right? And the other thing that I think would be really helpful and sort of a game changer for teachers as well is sort of and AI is sort of is becoming more and more integrated into sort of assessment planning and within closed systems. So school districts have the opportunity to sort of integrate AI in different ways for like goal tracking and stuff. But one of the things that is sort of still on the near horizon is this idea of like longitudinal progress tracking, right?
Mm.
So it's not just about like right or wrong answers, but being able to see like how comprehension and sentence sort of like, let's say, like writing structure and writing process grow over time, right? So imagine if as a teacher you had sort of a co-teacher in AI that could really help you sort of point to growth over time of a child's comprehension or growth over time through writing, right? If I mean to have that tool as a teacher, right? I mean, talk about then being able to personalize learning. And so I think that those are two areas, right? So that multimodal capability. And it's sort of there on the fringes now. Like each of those tools exist, but really able to put them together and to really seamlessly and make it in a simple user friendly way. The other thing too that we're still, while some of the bias that we know exists within AI in writing form has been addressed, there's still a lot of issues and research being done around the bias around images and stuff
Mm.
that AI produces. And so that's an area that we know we need to improve on before we start really integrating all of that like multimodality, but it's possible. It's AI is learning and I think it will continue to learn and improve if we as sort of the masterminds, the pilots, the people in charge of it, want it to improve, right? So I think as people were like, hey, it's a problem that it's biased or producing inaccuracies, then therefore they've improved that, right? And so I think again, if we are critical consumers and so like, hey, I have a problem with the biased and the prejudice in some of the image productions and we want it to be more accurate and call that out, it'll continue to improve, right? And so I'm hopeful for that. And again, the as it gets smarter, for it to help teachers again just make their practice for individual students stronger. That's what I'm looking forward for.
Yeah, I mean, all of that gets me really excited, but I think the key that you were describing is that AI is still learning.
Mhm.
We know it's biased, but as the teachers of AI, we have the opportunity to untrain it, unbias it, train it to not be as biased, right? And that comes from all of us having input. So, and I think that goes back to equity too, empowering students to know that they are teachers and trainers of AI as well. And the more feedback they
Yep.
input into it, the better it will become for all students.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things if we value that, right? If we want our tool to be less biased, to be more accurate and all that, well, we have to give it that feedback and call it out and not accept it. And so I think the more we do that and the more research that's continued to be done on it and to call that out and to name it, the better the tools will continue to evolve. If it's not something we don't value or don't see that it's important, then it won't. But and I think you're spot on. It is an equity issue, and we need to continue to focus on that, and hopefully create the strongest tools possible that are grounded in areas of equity and intentionally um avoid issues like with bias and inaccuracies and things like that. But that's where that critical reflection and use comes in. If we just
Mhm.
accept it blindly, we're never going to improve those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this podcast is called Reading Inspires. So I always like to end by asking our guests, what does reading inspire for you?
Oh, this is such a tough question. So I think for me, reading inspires creativity, connection, and courage. So creativity, I think it's hard for me to not get excited when I read because it's this storytelling, right? It makes me think a new way or question or spark imagination, right? The connection is that, if you and I read the same book, that sort of spark and excitement that we have. Um, Also, I feel connected, like if I read fiction, like historical fiction or just history to others, to my
Mhm.
past. And so there's just a connection to everybody. And then really ultimately around courage, because hopefully that's that critical piece, right? Like that critical literacy piece that I hopefully, reading it inspires myself and others to have empathy, to speak up, and ideally work towards change when we aren't happy with things, right? Because stories and readings show us what's possible, and hopefully the courage to sort of live our own and speak into our truth and our voices. And so gives me hope. So I
Yeah.
guess all of those things.
Yeah, very hopeful. And thank you for this inspiring and hopeful conversation, Dr. Shannon Kane.